Welcome to Long Listen, a space for slow thinking in a fast world. This isn't a channel for quick summaries or surface-level takeaways. Here, we take our time. We sit with powerful ideas. We unpack the layers beneath the words. Each episode is a deep dive into books that challenge how we think, how we live, and how we see ourselves, from psychology and philosophy to modern culture and timeless literature. If you're tired of shallow content and hungry for depth, reflection, and meaningful conversation, you're in the right place. Put on your headphones, slow down, and let's think deeply together. Most people think they're tired because they work too much. Too many deadlines, too many messages, too many expectations. But what if that's not the real reason? What if you're exhausted not because life is hard, but because your brain never gets to stop deciding? Think about this. You wake up in the morning. Before your feet even touch the floor, your mind is already busy. Should I get up now or snooze for 5 more minutes? Do I check my phone first or brush my teeth first? Should I reply to that message now or later? You wake up, open your eyes, and have to decide. Browse TikTok first or check your email first. Just 3 seconds, and you don't get tired. 3 seconds, and your brain is already tired. That's the strange thing about modern life. We don't feel tired because we're lifting heavy things or running long distances. We feel tired because we are constantly choosing. And the scary part? Most of those choices don't even feel like choices. They feel automatic, invisible, harmless, scrolling, clicking, comparing, judging, reacting. You didn't sit down and say, "Now I will overthink my future." It just happened. This is where thinking fast and slow quietly enters your life. Whether you've read the book or not, Daniel Kahneman doesn't start by asking how to make better decisions. He asks a more uncomfortable question. Who is actually making your decisions? Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner in economics because of his work on psychology, says that inside your head, there are 2 characters fighting 24/7. Not metaphorically, literally. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. It reacts before you even realize you're reacting. It's the voice that says, "This feels right," or "This feels wrong," without explaining why. System 2 is slow, careful, logical. It's the part of you that actually thinks things through. But it's also lazy and easily tired. Here's the problem. You probably think you are System 2. The thoughtful one, the rational one, the "I've thought about this carefully" person. Kahneman says, not really. Most of the time, System 1 is driving, and System 2 is sitting in the passenger seat, half asleep, occasionally, nodding and saying, "Yeah, that makes sense. That's not a bug in your brain. That's how human brains evolved to survive." Fast thinking kept us alive when danger was real and immediate. Slow thinking was expensive. It consumed energy. So the brain learned to avoid using it unless absolutely necessary. But here's where things get messy. We no longer live in a world where danger jumps out from behind trees. We live in a world of notifications, news feeds, success stories, highlight reels, hot takes, and endless options. And System 1? It treats all of that as urgent, as meaningful, as something that needs a reaction now. That's why you feel mentally drained after doing nothing for hours. That's why scrolling can feel more exhausting than studying. That's why you go to bed tired, even though you barely moved your body. Your brain wasn't resting. It was working non-stop, fast, reactive, emotional work, without you noticing. Thinking fast and slow isn't a productivity book. It doesn't give you life hacks or morning routines. it does something far more unsettling. It shows you that the reason you feel confused, overwhelmed, and mentally tired is not because you're weak or undisciplined. It's because your brain was never designed for this many decisions, this much stimulation, and this little silence. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. In the next part, we'll talk about how these two systems actually play out in everyday life, in money, relationships, confidence, and that quiet pressure you feel to always be doing something right. Because the real question isn't how to think faster or slower. It's how to survive in a world that never stops asking your brain to choose. To really understand why thinking fast and slow hits so uncomfortably close to home, we need to stop thinking of System 1 and System 2 as abstract psychology terms. They're not theories floating above your life. They are playing out in very ordinary, very modern moments, the kind you barely notice, but that slowly shape how you feel about yourself. Let's start with System 1, because it's the one you meet first every day. System 1 is instant. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask, "Is this reasonable?" It asks only one thing. "What does this feel like right now?" And then it reacts. You see a classmate post photos from a trip to Japan. Nothing dramatic. Just cherry blossoms, ramen, clean streets, smiles. System 1 immediately whispers, "I'm falling behind." 5 minutes later, you're searching for flights, even though you know your bank account is already on life support this month. No spreadsheet, no budgeting, just a feeling. And the feeling feels real. Or you're scrolling late at night, half tired, half numb. A quote pops up. "Hustle 24/7, sleep when you're successful." It hits something insecure inside you. System 1 doesn't analyze whether that mindset is healthy or whether the person posting it actually lives that way. It just reacts, "I need to work harder." 10 minutes later, you've impulse bought a 5 million dong online course you haven't even checked the reviews for. It feels like progress. It feels like control. It feels like doing something. System 1 loves that feeling. This is the thing about System 1. It is incredibly persuasive. It doesn't argue. It declares. It tells you stories that sound obvious. Everyone else is moving faster. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. If you don't act now, you'll regret it. And because it speaks quickly and confidently, it feels like the truth. Kahneman's uncomfortable insight is that System 1 is not stupid. It's efficient. It evolved to make fast judgments when hesitation could mean danger. But the modern world has turned that efficiency against us. Social media, advertising, hustle culture, even productivity advice, all of them are designed to speak directly to System 1. They don't want you to think. They want you to feel, react, click, buy, compare. Now, in theory, this is where System 2 is supposed to step in. System 2 is the calm voice that says, "Wait, let's slow down." It's the part of you that can ask real questions. Do I actually need this? Is this decision aligned with my long-term goals? Am I reacting to emotion or reality? But here's the twist most people miss. System 2 is not just slow, it is incredibly lazy. Kahneman literally calls it the lazy controller. System 2 doesn't like work, it doesn't like effort, it doesn't like being activated unless absolutely necessary. Thinking carefully costs energy, and your brain is always trying to conserve energy. So unless there's a clear reason to intervene, System 2 often just lets System 1 do whatever it wants and then quietly signs off on it. That's why knowing better doesn't automatically lead to doing better. You know you should sleep early. You've read the articles, you've watched the videos, you understand the benefits. But at 11:30 p.m., System 1 says, "Just one more video. Tomorrow we'll wake up early and go to the gym to compensate." System 2 hears this, sighs, and says, fine. And then tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And suddenly you're stuck in a loop you fully understand, but still can't break. This is one of the most frustrating human experiences, being aware of your own bad patterns and still repeating them. Kahneman's work helps explain why that happens without turning it into a moral failure. You're not weak. You're not undisciplined. You're dealing with a brain architecture that prioritizes short-term comfort over long-term coherence. System 1 lives in the present moment. It doesn't care about future you. System 2 can care about the future, but only when it's awake, alert, and willing to put in the effort. And in a world that constantly drains your attention, System 2 is tired most of the time. This dynamic shows up everywhere. In money, for example. You tell yourself you're saving, but System 1 sees a discount and reframes spending as being smart. You didn't plan to buy anything, but suddenly it feels wasteful not to. In relationships, System 1 reacts to tone, to silence, to small signals. A delayed reply becomes a story. They're losing interest. System 2 could slow this down, ask for context, remember past evidence, but only if you give it space to think. Most of the time, you don't. What makes this even harder for young people today is that System 1 is constantly being triggered by design. Apps are optimized for speed and emotion, not reflection. News headlines are written to provoke, not to inform. Success stories are compressed into 30-second clips that erase years of invisible struggle. System 1 consumes all of this and draws conclusions at lightning speed. I'm behind. I should be further by now. Everyone else seems to have it figured out. And then we wonder why anxiety feels ambient, why rest feels undeserved, why doing nothing feels uncomfortable. Kahneman isn't saying System 1 is the enemy. Without it, you wouldn't function. You'd be paralyzed by overthinking every tiny action. The problem is imbalance. System 1 has become too dominant, not because it's evil, but because the environment rewards it. Meanwhile, System 2 is overwhelmed, overstimulated, and chronically underused for the decisions that actually matter. This is why so much modern advice fails. It assumes that if you explain something clearly enough, people will change their behavior. But explanation speaks to System 2, while behavior is often driven by System 1. You can understand everything intellectually and still feel stuck emotionally. That gap between knowing and doing is where most self-blame lives. What thinking, fast and slow, gently but firmly suggests is that self-control is not about becoming more disciplined all the time. It's about recognizing when System 1 is running the show and designing your life so System 2 doesn't have to fight so hard to be heard. That's a very different mindset from hustle culture. Hustle culture tells you to push harder, sleep less, do more. Kahneman's work quietly implies the opposite. Maybe the goal isn't to force better decisions, but to reduce the number of decisions your exhausted brain has to make in the first place. Because once System 2 is depleted, you don't become neutral. You become reactive. You default to habits, impulses, and emotional shortcuts. And then you judge yourself for outcomes that were almost inevitable, given the cognitive load you were under. Understanding this doesn't magically fix everything. Kahneman is very honest about that. Awareness does not equal immunity. Even experts fall for the same biases. Even the person who named these systems is still human. But awareness changes the tone of the conversation you have with yourself. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "What system is speaking right now?" And sometimes, that small pause, that moment of naming what's happening, is enough to interrupt the loop. Not always, but sometimes. And in a world that never stops demanding your attention, those small moments of pause might be the most realistic form of freedom we have. In the next part, we'll look at specific biases that hit young people the hardest, not in theory, but in everyday emotional experiences like fear of missing out, regret, comparison, and that constant sense that you should be doing more than you are. By the time you understand System 1 and System 2, something uncomfortable starts to happen. You begin to recognize patterns, not just in abstract decisions, but in emotions you thought were just part of your personality. Anxiety, restlessness, that constant low-level pressure to not fall behind. Kahneman would argue that many of these feelings aren't random at all. They are predictable outcomes of how certain cognitive biases interact with modern life, especially for young people. One of the strongest and most exhausting forces is what many people now casually call FOMO, but what Thinking Fast and Slow helps explain as a deep interaction between loss aversion and fast, emotional thinking. The fear of missing out isn't really about wanting everything. It's about being terrified of losing a possible future version of yourself. A better job, a cooler life, a more successful timeline. So you see a job posting that looks promising. Maybe it's not even perfect, but System 1 panics. If I don't apply, someone else will get it. That fear multiplies. Soon, you're applying to 20 jobs at once, customizing nothing, juggling interviews, replying to emails late at night. At first, it feels productive. You're doing something. You're chasing an opportunity. Then weeks pass. Your energy drops. Rejections pile up. Even the good responses feel heavy. Burnout arrives quietly, not because you aimed too high, but because you tried to keep too many doors open at the same time. The same pattern shows up in trends. You scroll, you see a hot girl wearing a certain outfit, using a certain product, living a certain aesthetic. System 1 reacts instantly. If I don't have this, I'm missing out. You buy it. You wear it once. Then it sits in your closet, untouched, while the next trend replaces it. The object itself was never the point. The feeling of not being left behind was. FOMO thrives because System 1 is obsessed with potential loss. It doesn't ask whether the thing you're chasing actually fits your life. It only asks whether you might regret not chasing it. And regret is one of the emotions System 1 hates the most. Another bias that quietly shapes young people's worldview is availability bias, the tendency to judge reality based on the examples that are easiest to recall. In Kahneman's framework, System 1 assumes that what comes to mind quickly must be common, important, or true. And in the age of algorithms, what comes to mind is rarely neutral. Scroll through TikTok or Instagram long enough, and you'll start seeing the same stories repeated. Dropouts who became millionaires, teenagers trading crypto, creators who escaped the 9-to-5 at 22. System 1 absorbs these stories and draws a dangerous conclusion. This must be normal. Quitting school must be a shortcut. Struggling quietly must mean you're doing something wrong. What you don't see, because it doesn't trend, because it doesn't perform well, because it doesn't feel inspiring, are the 99% who tried the same path and failed. The silent stories, the boring outcomes, the people who went back to square one with less money, less confidence, and more self-doubt. Availability bias doesn't lie to you directly. It simply shows you a distorted sample and lets System 1 fill in the gaps. The same distortion happens in relationships. You see friends posting single but happy captions. You see jokes about how peaceful life is without drama. System 1 jumps to conclusions. Breaking up equals freedom. Being alone equals growth. Then the breakup happens. At first, there is relief. Then there are quiet evenings. Then weekends stretch too long. Loneliness appears, unfiltered, without a caption. That part was never available in the feed. So System 1 never accounted for it. Kahneman's point isn't that these decisions are wrong. It's that the mental environment in which they're made is deeply skewed. When System 1 only sees highlights, it builds expectations on incomplete data. System 2 could, in theory, correct this, but only if you slow down enough to ask what's missing from the picture. Most of the time, you don't. Social proof is another powerful force shaping behavior, especially online. When many people like something, share something, or believe something, System 1 treats it as evidence. So many people can't be wrong. That instinct once helped humans survive in groups. Today, it pushes people into trends, opinions, and lifestyles they never consciously chose. You see everyone around you grinding, talking about side hustles, monetizing hobbies, optimizing every hour. System 1 concludes, this is what serious people do. Rest starts to feel like failure. Stillness feels suspicious. Even joy feels unproductive unless it can be shared or turned into content. Social proof doesn't ask whether the crowd is tired. It only notices that the crowd is moving. Anchoring works in a quieter but equally damaging way. The first number, image, or standard you encounter becomes the reference point for everything else. You hear that someone your age earns a certain salary. That number sticks. Suddenly, your own income feels small, even if it comfortably covers your needs. You see influencers living in beautiful apartments. That aesthetic becomes the anchor. Your normal room now feels inadequate, even though nothing about it changed. Anchors are powerful because they bypass reasoning. You don't choose them, they choose you. And once they're set, System 1 constantly compares your reality to a benchmark you never consciously agreed to. Then, there's confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms what you already believe. This one feels personal because it wraps bias in emotion. If you already dislike your boss, your brain becomes an expert at collecting evidence. Every criticism is remembered. Every compliment disappears. Over time, your dislike feels justified, even obvious. System 1 builds a narrative and selectively edits reality to support it. System 2 could challenge this, but again, only if it's willing to do the work. And perhaps the most emotionally destructive bias for young people today is negativity bias, amplified by the internet. Human brains evolved to prioritize negative information because it once kept us alive. One threat mattered more than 10 neutral signals. Online, this wiring becomes a trap. You post something, you get 100 likes. Then there's one toxic comment. Guess which one you remember? Guess which one replays in your head at night? System 1 latches onto it. It doesn't matter that 99 people responded positively. One negative voice feels louder than all the rest. You lose sleep over it. You question yourself. You replay the words, trying to figure out what they say about you. Negativity bias convinces you that criticism reveals truth, while praise is just noise. It makes you hypersensitive, self-critical, and emotionally exhausted. And because social media constantly supplies small doses of negativity, System 1 is almost never at rest. When you step back and look at all these biases together, a pattern emerges. None of them mean you're broken. They mean you're human in an environment that relentlessly exploits how it knows your mind works. The exhaustion many young people feel isn't just emotional or economic. It's cognitive. Your brain is running outdated software in a hyper-optimized attention economy. Thinking fast and slow doesn't offer a clean escape from this. Kahneman is honest about that. Biases don't disappear just because you can name them, but naming them changes how personally you take your reactions. It shifts the story from "I'm failing" to "my brain is doing what brains do." That shift matters. Because once you stop treating every anxious thought as a personal truth, you gain a little distance. Not control. Distance. And distance is often the first step toward choosing differently, even if only occasionally. In the next part, we'll talk about what this book quietly suggests about modern success, hustle culture, and the idea that you should always be optimizing yourself. Not with motivational advice, but with a much more uncomfortable question. What if the goal isn't to think better, but to demand less from your thinking in the first place? By this point, it's tempting to turn Thinking Fast and Slow into another self-improvement manual. To ask, okay, so how do I train my brain to be smarter, faster, better at decisions? That impulse itself is very modern and very revealing. We're used to content that promises upgrades, level ups, frameworks to outperform our past selves. Kahneman's work quietly resists that urge. If there's one attitude this book encourages more than anything else, it's not ambition, it's humility. Not humility in the sense of thinking less of yourself, but humility about how much control you actually have over your own mind. Most podcasts sell the fantasy that once you understand the system, you can master it. Kahneman suggests something more uncomfortable. Even when you understand the system, you are still inside it. You don't escape bias. You learn to be less arrogant about your immunity to it. This is why Thinking Fast and Slow feels so different from Learn to Be Better, Content. It doesn't flatter the listener. It doesn't say, now that you know this, you'll outperform everyone else. It says, now that you know this, you might stop blaming yourself so harshly and stop trusting yourself so blindly. Humility here means accepting that your intuitions are often wrong, especially when emotions are high, information is incomplete, or the stakes feel personal. It means recognizing that confidence is not evidence, that clarity can be an illusion, and that feeling certain doesn't mean you are right. Confidence is not evidence. Clarity can be an illusion. Feeling certain doesn't mean you are right. Paradoxically, that kind of humility can be deeply calming. Because once you stop trying to win every internal argument, you can start designing your life to require fewer of them. This is where Kahneman becomes surprisingly practical, not through grand philosophies, but through small environmental changes that reduce the burden on your tired system too. The goal isn't to think harder. It's to think less, at least about the things that don't deserve your energy. One simple idea is what we might call a decision-free morning. Mornings are when your mental energy is at its highest, yet we often waste it on trivial choices. What to wear, what to eat, what to check first. Each tiny decision pulls on System 2 just a little, until by the time something important appears, you're already depleted. A decision-free morning means you remove those choices in advance. You wear a pre-chosen outfit. You eat the same simple breakfast. You don't scroll. You don't negotiate with yourself. For the first hour, nothing is up for debate. This isn't about discipline or aesthetics. It's about protecting your cognitive energy for later decisions that actually matter. You're not becoming more productive. You're being more realistic about your limits. Another tool is the 10-minute rule. System 1 thrives on immediacy. It wants action now. Buy now, reply now, react now. System 2, in contrast, needs time to wake up. The 10-minute rule is simply this. Before any impulsive purchase, heated comment, or emotionally charged decision, you wait 10 minutes. You don't analyze, you don't argue, you just delay. This small pause often does something surprising. The emotional intensity drops. The story System 1 was telling loses its urgency. Sometimes you still go through with the action, but now it feels like a choice, not a reflex. That's System 2 finally having a seat at the table, not because it's smarter, but because it was given a chance to exist. Your phone, usually the biggest enemy of slow thinking, can also become an ally if used intentionally. One simple example is setting reminders that interrupt overconfidence. A note that pops up saying, "If you're exhausted today, don't make big decisions." This sounds obvious, almost silly. But System 1 hates reminders that challenge its confidence. When you're tired, you often feel oddly certain. A small external nudge can prevent you from trusting that certainty too much. This isn't about outsourcing your life to technology. It's about acknowledging that when your internal systems are unreliable, external support matters. Just like you wouldn't drive without brakes, you shouldn't navigate emotional decisions without guardrails. Another powerful but underestimated practice is curating your information diet. If System 1 is constantly being activated by comparison, outrage, and negativity, no amount of self-control will fully compensate. One realistic step is to unfollow or mute the 10 most emotionally draining accounts in your feed each week. Not forever, just for now. This isn't censorship, it's maintenance. You don't owe your attention to content that reliably makes you anxious, inferior, or angry. By reducing the triggers that feed System 1, you create a mental environment where System 2 doesn't have to fight so hard just to be heard. You don't owe your attention to content that consistently harms your peace. What ties all these practices together is not discipline, but compassion. Compassion for your own cognitive limitations. Kahneman's work doesn't suggest you can outthink your biases through willpower alone. It suggests that wisdom lies in designing a life that doesn't constantly provoke them. This is where humility becomes practical. Instead of asking, "How do I become more rational?" you ask, "In what situations am I least rational?" Instead of trusting your confidence, you become suspicious of it, especially when it shows up late at night, under pressure, or after scrolling for an hour. There's a quiet freedom in this shift. You stop treating every bad decision as a personal failure. You stop expecting yourself to operate like a machine. You begin to see rest, simplicity, and boundaries not as weaknesses, but as intelligent responses to a demanding environment. Thinking fast and slow doesn't promise transformation. It promises awareness. And awareness, while not glamorous, can be life-saving in small, cumulative ways. It can prevent one impulsive purchase, one unnecessary argument, one self-destructive spiral. Over time, those small non-events add up. In the final part, we'll step back and ask a bigger question. What does this book quietly suggest about success, happiness, and the stories we tell ourselves about being ahead or behind? Because once you accept that your mind is fallible, the definition of a good life starts to shift, away from constant optimization and towards something much quieter and much more human. If there's one thing thinking fast and slow leaves you with, it's not confidence, it's caution. A quiet kind of caution toward your own certainty, toward that inner voice that sounds convincing, urgent, and absolute, especially when you're tired, emotional, or scrolling alone at night. Daniel Kahneman doesn't offer a formula for a perfect life. He doesn't promise clarity, success, or peace of mind. What he offers instead is something subtler. Permission to doubt your first thought. Permission to pause. Permission to accept that being human means being biased, inconsistent, and often unsure. Permission to doubt. Permission to pause. Permission to be imperfect. In a culture obsessed with speed, optimization, and being ahead, this is a radical idea. It suggests that wisdom isn't about thinking harder or faster, but about knowing when not to trust your thinking at all. It reframes self-control not as discipline, but as design. Not as forcing yourself to be better, but as creating conditions where you don't have to fight yourself constantly. Wisdom isn't about thinking harder. It's about knowing when not to trust your thinking. Maybe you don't need more motivation. Maybe you need fewer triggers. Maybe you don't need clearer goals. Maybe you need more rest. Maybe the problem isn't that you're falling behind, but that you're measuring your life with tools that were never meant for you. Thinking fast and slow doesn't make life simpler. It makes it more honest. It reminds us that behind every confident decision is a fragile brain trying its best in a noisy world. And once you see that, you might stop demanding perfection from yourself and start offering a little patience instead. Before you go, try this small experiment. Try to note down the decision that has been most exhausting for you. Where did it come from? System 1 or pressure from social media? Leave a comment so I and everyone else can know. Sometimes, the first step toward a calmer life isn't choosing better. It's finally understanding why choosing feels so exhausting in the first place.